Thank you for viewing this American Sewing Guild educational series on the basics of gathering fabric. Gathers provide fullness in fabric to create the silhouette of a design. Gathers can be in skirts, pants, sleeves, collars, ruffles, draperies, pillows, almost anywhere. When fabric is gathered, tiny crimps are created in the fabric by first sewing rows of stitching spaced evenly apart from the cut edge of the fabric. Gathers are best when used in very lightweight to medium weight fabrics. Gathers placed in heavy fabrics do not look good, nor do they fall pretty, and actually increase visual bulk where used. In heavy fabrics, tucks or pleats would probably be a better choice. Begin with a piece of fabric. Depending on where the gathered piece is to be used in the project, sometimes the hemming is done prior to gathering the fabric. Be sure the fabric is pressed and is free of wrinkles. If desired, lightly starch prior to pressing to make the fabric easier to handle. Set up the sewing machine. To baste, set the stitch length to 4 millimeters. This stitch length provides nice even gathers in most fabrics. It is important to do the gathering stitches with the right side of the fabric facing up as shown. The gathering will be done with the bobbin threads and can be easily located at the back of the fabric. Leave a 3 to 4 inch thread tail. Begin by placing the needle in the fabric just inside the seam allowance to be sewn. Lower the presser foot and hold the thread tails. This is an important step so that the thread does not tangle at the beginning of the seam. Using the throat plate as a guide, just inside that 5/8 inch line, or as indicated on the pattern, stitch the single layer of fabric all the way down. At the end, leave another 3 to 4 inch thread tail for gathering. Beginning back at the top, sew the second line of stitching 1 presser foot width away. Follow the outer edge of the foot along the first row of stitching to maintain consistency. Don't forget to leave the thread tails and hold them at the beginning of the row as well. Leave 3 to 4 inch thread tails at the end of the row. Most pattern sewing instructions only state to use 2 rows of thread upon which to gather. Stitch a third row between the first 2 sewn. This extra row of stitching allows the fabric to gather more evenly, provides added strength for gathering, and if one of the threads should break, 2 still remain. If there were only 2 rows and one broke, all the stitching would have to be removed and redone. Here the 3 rows of stitching have been completed. Flip the fabric over and separate the bobbin threads from the top threads. Work the gathering with the bobbin threads from one cut edge toward the center and then from the other cut edge toward the center. Lay the gathered piece on a flat surface and even out the gathering. With the edge of the iron at the gathered edge only, press the gathers within the gathered seam allowance. The edge of the iron should not go past the last thread row. You want to press the gathers within the seam allowance only. By pressing the gathered seam allowance, it will be easier to apply to the garment piece to which it will be attached. Be sure when applying the gathered piece to the next section of the garment that the ends of the gathering that would lie within the seam allowance are smooth and flat. The gathering should only go to the edge of where the seam line will be. There should be no gathers within the seam allowance area. Let's watch how this is done. Set up the machine for basting so the first row scant inside the seam allowance. Sew the second row 1 presser foot width away from the first, using the first stitching line as a guide. Sew the third row in between the first 2. From the back or bobbin side of the fabric, separate the top and bobbin threads. Begin at the cut edge and work toward the center. Find the 3 bobbin threads, hold them taut, and then gather the fabric along the threads, adjusting as necessary. You would also repeat this from the other side. Press the gathers only in the seam allowance area. Do not let the edge of the iron go beyond the last line of stitching. Press and even out the gathers as you go. This will slightly flatten the gathers in the seam allowance area, making the gathered piece easier to insert into the project. Thank you for viewing this American Sewing Guild video. If you have any questions, email Ramona at asg.org. The American Sewing Guild is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to people who believe sewing is a rewarding and creative activity. If you enjoyed this video, join ASG to view our library of in-depth educational videos on various sewing topics. They are free to our members. Members also enjoy discounts from vendors who support our organization, along with many other benefits.